Afternoon, Valiants, and welcome to this afternoon's United Nations Speaker Series program. It is my esteemed honor and privilege to welcome our speaker for today, Ebenezer, directly coming from Nigeria. So, Valiants, please put your hands together for our United Nations speaker for today, Ebenezer!
Thank you. That was quite an introduction, Craig. Thanks, and thanks,
You're
Valiance, for having me in your space today. I was just telling Craig earlier that it's currently 11 p.m. here, so I'm happy that this is the last thing I'm doing before I go to bed. So this is such an amazing way to close my day. So I'll be sharing my screen now, just so we can go right into it. Um, I'm not a pro with I'm not a pro with Teams, right? Unlike some other platforms. So just in case I'm struggling, I hope you guys give me like a heads up. Can you see my screen?
it
Is it
looks
up?
perfect.
Great, thanks. Okay, cool. So yeah, so my name is Ebenezar Wikina. Most people call me Eben. Uh I'll be speaking today about a very unusual topic. I'm sure this is a very unusual UN briefing session because I'm bringing in quite some interesting perspectives on biomimicry, and I'll talk a bit about biomimicry and how I think biomimicry can sort of like help us or influence some of the decision-making frameworks we have at the UN, especially the UN Security Council. And I'll just begin right into it. After this, I'll share my deck with Craig, so you can also get some of the links here as well. Okay, cool. So first, what is biomimicry? Biomimicry, some of you might have heard about this term biomimicry. It became popularized by Dr. Jenny Benias, say in the late 90s, but humankind has knowingly or unknowingly been practicing biomimicry for so many years now, for thousands of years now. Biomimicry actually is a practice that learns from and mimics strategies used by living organisms to solve challenges comparable to the ones that we face as individuals and as societies. So basically, biomimicry is looking at nature, seeing how nature has solved the problems that we're trying to solve, and imitating the processes, the ideas, the steps that nature has used to solve our own problems. And like I said, it goes as far back as even like Libuan, who came up with the umbrella by looking at lilies, or even like Leonardo da Vinci, who basically drew and invented many things, from like the early days of the flying machine and stuff like that. And even up until today in AI, people are beginning to look at how the brain is connected with neurons to sort of like mimic and create intelligent AI that basically can self-learn at a very faster pace. So I put in links here to a lot more about biomimicry and links to the history of biomimicry for those who would like to learn more about it. There are many examples starting from like Velcro to like how wind turbines are being made better now. One of my favorite examples is the Eastgate building in Harare, Zimbabwe, which uses very little cooling because it mimicked the way ant hills are built and how like air pressure goes in through all of these canals here to help make the building cooler, thereby reducing the need for air conditioners and stuff like that, which makes the climate a lot more better. So yeah, so there's so many examples to biomimicry, and the example I'm looking at today basically will be looking at how we can apply biomimicry to governance and diplomacy, and especially decision-making systems. These examples here, I mean, folks who work in the robotics space currently are just like going crazy about mimicry. They're making robots that fly like birds, that walk like lizards, that like, can lift like blocks and stuff like that, or hop like kangaroos and all that. So like I've put in the links there again. Feel free to go watch them. You're going to find them pretty cool. But one of my earliest form of biomimicry, and this is something I noticed growing up in Nigeria, right? Whether or not we knew this, architects in Nigeria build our roofs to mimic the banana leaf. So being the fact that we're in a tropical area, somewhere close to the equator, we have periods of rainfall and periods of dry season, right? And so during the rainfall, people usually use the roof design to be able to collect water. And banana growing somewhere in South America, you can find banana in Asia, you can find banana plantain in Africa, West Africa and the likes, East Africa. The banana tree is built in a way that its leaves are tilted at an angle that collects water directly into its sap, such that when it rains, for most other trees, it just falls directly on them and then falls to the ground. But for the banana tree, it falls into the leaf. You can see the schematic there. And this middle part of the leaf basically like directs water into its sap so that when it's dry season, it can use all of that water to continue to make food, go through photosynthesis, and remain green for most of the dry season across the areas. And that's something that we've been doing, like even when I was really younger. Most of our houses are built this way. You can see the two parts of the roof there, basically like mimicking the leaf. And whether or not we knew it, it helped us for like rainwater collection that was used for like wastewater or using to like wash cars or stuff like that. And so like, again, to my point that knowingly or unknowingly, we've been mimicking nature. And so the question has always been on my mind to say, why haven't we really like mimicked nature in our decision making, in our governance systems, right? If we do it in architecture, we do it in, like finance and those kind of things, right? Why can't we do it in governance at the UN, where we have global decision making powers coming together? And for quite a number of years, it does feel like many decisions have stagnated. There's something that the UN has a goal of what it wants to achieve and what eventually achieves. And there's always a huge disparity between both of them. So over the past 5 years, I've been researching and sort of like trying to find ways to apply biomimicry to governance, to public policy. And this is what I've been pioneering mostly in the biomimicry community. And so today I'm actually opening this up to you, to invite you, to join me in this research, because I think that this is a very interesting field that will open up over the next couple of years. So these are, I put links here as well. If you click on them, you get information there. These are some of the work I've done over the past few years. I'll speak about the 10-3 voting shortly. That's for the Security Council, but I've done stuff around 9/11. What are some of the auditing that we can do around 9/11 to see how we could have built, we can build offices better for bigger populations. I talked about Black Lives Matter and compared the human population to the Argentine ants and stuff like that. So just check it out, and I'll be going quickly because I have quite a bit more to talk about. But yeah, this is basically the basis for what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so away from biomimicry now. So the state of global policymaking and the UN Security Council. You'd agree with me, especially if you followed like conversations around the climate change conference, the Security Council negotiations, everything happening now currently, right? All over the world. Policymaking for a long time, especially global policymaking, has been quite biased, right? In many ways, it's mostly favored the rich and powerful countries. And even when these people who you read as, less powerful countries come into the conversation, they often leave with the short side of the stick. They're not able to get decisions or agreements, whether it's on climate, or even like on issues, general issues like the SDGs, right? They're not able to get the resources and the things needed to be able to move their countries and their agendas forward. If you look at the COP meeting, right? This is a good example. So this is from, I think this is from COP 20 something. This one COP 26, right? And if you look at the left, the chart on the left shows the 40 countries who pledged to shift away from coal. And the chart on the right shows the 40 countries, the countries, the big countries who use coal the most. You see, you have India, you have China, you have, all the big names, right? And if you look at the left, you don't have any of them pledging to quit coal, right? And so you have these conversations happening at the global level where everyone comes together and is so excited to like move things forward, and they don't make any progress over and over and over again. We had COP 26 times, right? Over and over and over and over again. So it does feel like so much hasn't moved in shifting the needle. And I think quite a lot of that is because of how the decision-making process is in most of our global bodies. So take the Security Council, for example, right? It was set up in, its first meeting held in 1946. The idea behind the Security Council is that it was made to sort of like prevent another world war. It's the highest decision-making body after the General Assembly. It basically makes decisions by adopting resolutions and carries out peace operations. And during these resolutions, member countries can like vote on these resolutions. And it has 15 council members. 5 of these council members are the permanent members, which are like the P5, the big boys: China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. And these are permanent members. And then you have 10 members who are non-permanent members, who are also like the the 10 countries who get 2-year terms to join the Security Council. Members usually continue to like discuss things and reflect on current issues based on like when Russia invaded Ukraine, all the issues that have happened all over the world. Once these issues happen, the Security Council meets because these are issues that affect global peace and the basic like the functioning of the world, right? Basically. But the Security Council has a voting style, which I think is quite like, I mean, if you look at what African wild dogs do, it was good for its time, but I think at the moment now, thinking about global consolidation, moving things forward, I think it's quite a cake because for the Security Council to sort of like adopt a decision, it needs 9 yes votes, right? And except in votes that have to do with like procedural questions or basic issues, a permanent member has to vote. If a permanent member doesn't vote on the case, it gets cancelled. The P5, the China, France, Russia, UK, and US have something called veto power. And with veto power, if a resolution is raised up and maybe like he has 20, whatever, 15, 16, or 14 other people saying yes to it, if China says no to it, it gets cancelled. So everyone else can agree. But if one of the permanent members says no, everything gets cancelled. And I actually put here, I hope I also shared sound. Just an example of how the Security Council makes a decision. So this had happened after Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And this is the discussion in the Security Council to condemn Russia's action on Ukraine invasion and stuff like that. So just see how the decision happened, and I'll quickly talk to you about the African wild dog to show you a completely different system of group decision making.
Okay, so let's see. If you want to share the sound.
The resolution.
Oh, no, it's perfect. Never mind. Cool. You did perfect. Did you ever hear? I was going to say there's a thing on Teams where you share the sound content, but you already did it. So perfect. Thank you.
Condemning Russia that was put before the Security Council was drawn up jointly by Albania and by the US.
In defense of all countries to have the right to be safe from invasion and annexation, we are voting yes. And in defense of the world's collective peace and security, we urge you to vote yes too. Let us show Putin the resolve of this council.
In response, Russia sounded incredulous.
Tell me, do you seriously expect Russia to consider and support such a draft? And if not, then it turns out that you are intentionally pushing us to use the right of the veto in order to then wax lyrical about the fact that Russia abuses this right.
And so when the draft resolution was put to the vote, there was no doubt how Russia would respond. It's a permanent member of the Security Council with veto power, and it used it.
Abstentions. Please raise your hands.
But it's notable that 4 other council members decided not to support the resolution and instead to abstain: China, Brazil, Gabon, and India.
Escalation of rhetoric or tension is in no one's interest. It is important that pathways are found for a return to the negotiating table. Keeping in view the totality of the evolving situation, India decided to abstain on the resolution.
Thank you.
After the meeting, the US...
Okay, so you guys basically get the story, right? Russia has done this. One of the permanent members had done something. So it couldn't be Russia. It could have been France or China or any other permanent member, right? So the idea is that if a permanent member does something, they can stop the Security Council from condemning their action because they have veto power. Now, I want to show you because, like, in observing, so I used to work as a journalist. I used to write for HuffPo and I wrote for Al Jazeera a couple of years. And in observing like global politics and dynamics of power, I did find, very frustrating having to write the stories over and again because they always sounded like, if you're powerful, you always get away with things, right? And so when I got into the biomimicry field and then studied to become a biomimicry practitioner, and I started to like study how ecosystems, whether it's like social insects or various ecosystems, whether it's ants or bees or hornets, etc., how they begin to assemble. I stumbled one day on the African wild dogs and I got really like just like hooked on them, right? And the African wild dogs, similar to the Security Council, they have dominant members, right? They're dominant dogs and they're less dominant dogs. They're the ones who are stronger, they're the ones who are bigger, etc. And they live across the sub-Saharan African region, especially in savannas and arid areas. before they make a decision to eat, so because they live in packs, right? The pack could have about 18 to 156 or 54 dogs. Before they make a decision to go hunt together as a pack, they have to vote. So they have something called a sneeze voting system. I know it's ridiculous. Like I couldn't even believe it. They have a sneeze voting system, and the African wild dogs would have a high-powered social rally. They will move around, and I mean, I have a short video here that you're going to watch to see what's like. They'll move around and play around and everything, and then someone will call for the sneeze vote. So either a less dominant dog or a dominant dog will call for the sneeze vote to say we should move. If the dog is able to if the dominant dog raises that sneeze voting call, if the dog gets 3 other dogs to sneeze along with it, the whole pack agrees to move to go hunt. If a less dominant dog, or who is not a powerful dog, raises the sneeze vote, if 10 other dogs sneeze along with it, the whole pack, whether or not the dominant dogs want to hunt or not, everybody has to move to go vote. And I thought, wow, that was quite interesting, right? Because it's a system that doesn't negate the power of dominant dogs. Dominant dogs still have their dominance, right? Because they raise the sneeze votes and only 3 dogs have to join them. But at the same time, it also gives power to the less dominant dogs, because you can have a situation where dominant dogs are we don't want to go hunt. But if a less dominant dog is able to rally 10 other dogs, whether they're dominant or not, to join the sneeze vote, then they all go to hunt. And I thought, wow, that's so smart. I wonder how they're able to come up with this, And so I have this very short video that gives you a sort of an explanation on how the African wild dogs carry out their sneeze votes. Hope you enjoy it.
A herd of buffalo. They're far too big for one dog to take on alone, and could easily kill a single wild dog. If they are to eat, they need the whole pack. But how does a group of 11 dogs make the decision that now is the right time to hunt? The secret is a pre-hunt rally. The whole pack performs high-energy, almost play-like behavior. The dog version of a pre-match huddle, getting each family member in sync and fired up. But scientists studying the ninja pack and other wild dog packs in the Okavango have discovered something even more intriguing. Just before and during a rally, the dogs begin to sneeze. There are several theories as to why the dogs do this, but one study suggests it could, believe it or not, be a complex voting system. If there are enough sneezes, the pack will be more likely to move off and hunt. If not, they will stay and rest. Sneezing completed. The decision is made. The hunt is on. African wild dogs can cover over 6 miles a day in search of food. A herd of impala. The pack sets off in pursuit, led by the subordinate female. And working together, they've made a kill. A herd of buffalo.
Okay, guys. So I'm sure when you signed up with Craig to join today's session, you didn't think you were going to watch Nat Geo. But yeah, so that's how the wild dogs make a decision, right? And there have been several studies on the African wild dogs. So just in my typical way, I put in links to all of the slides with data and information and DOI documents, which you can read in your own spare time. That's sort of like, how scientists were able to discover this phenomenon of how less dominant dogs can also lead the pack if they get 10 sneezes. And dominant dogs can still lead the pack if they get three sneezes. And so it's more like a quorum system, right? It still recognizes the power of the dominant dog, but it also gives power to the less dominant dog. And so if you think of it and think of the Security Council, you begin to get a couple of ideas, right? And I'm going to go to that shortly. Also, scientists also found out that most times when they have the first rally, so you remember when they're all moving around and playing around, that first rallies really didn't always end in them coming up with a decision, right? Only 26% of first rallies kind of like ended in that kind of decision. And that they will sometimes do, 5 or 8 rallies. Oh, sorry, those sometimes do like three or 4 rallies before they will be able to come up with a decision. So they had to do this over and over again to be able to decide on certain things. And if you think of the Security Council, sometimes it does feel like we're sort of in a hurry to make certain decisions, right? So it's like things have to be done on the spot without as much time given to member countries or even diplomats there at that space to be able to consult better, to be able to come up with those kind of decisions, right? So, we said, from reading this, I just had to see a lot of like similarities with our own style. And so that's how the 10-3 voting system came up. And I mean, you don't have to be Einstein, that the 10 and the 3 is from the number of sneezes, right? And so the 10-3 voting system is an attempt to sort of like suggest an alternate voting system to the Security Council. And if you look at both the Security Council and the African Wild Dog Pack, there's so many similarities. Security Council has a mix of dominant and less dominant members. The wild dogs have a mix of dominant and less dominant people in the pack, right? Decisions on key interventions are made by voting, right? So the Security Council has to vote to condemn actions, to lead peace operations, to stop certain things. There has to be a vote. African wild dogs as well have to vote to move, and if they don't move, they're all probably going to die, so they actually have to vote. That's like it's key to their survival. The Security Council, however, or sadly, or alternatively, has its final decisions directed by dominant members, right, which is the veto power, whereas the African wild dogs allow the will of the group, which is the quorum system, to override whether or not dominant people or dominant dogs have preferences. And so if you dissect the voting style further, you find out that they have three principles. The first principle is that the voting style identifies the initiator of the votes and makes every other member of the pack homogeneous, right? So it only matters if an issue is being raised by a less dominant dog or a dominant dog. Everybody else, your vote is equal, right? So once the less dominant dog raises a thing, whether a dominant dog votes or a less dominant dog votes, if he gets 10, everybody moves, right? So that power comes from knowing who is raising, so who's the initiator of the votes. The second principle is that it also requires a certain number of votes for quorum per initiator. So it then says, if you're the powerful dog, you just need 3. You don't need to wait till you get 10 because we know you're really powerful. And if you're not so powerful, you need 10. And if you do get 10, it doesn't matter if the dominant dog cares or not. He has to join everyone and move. And I think the third principle really is that I've said this before, they repeat them themselves. So if they do these social rallies, they don't really get, the dominant guy raises his knees, gets only 2. They don't move, they rest for a while, and then do another rally again until they get a decision met before they move. Okay, so how do we apply this to the Security Council? So veto power, right, was brought in the Security Council to sort of like stop nuclear war. Because after the Second World War, it became really clear that like we don't really want to have another war, right? The League of Nations came together and said, how can we make sure we do not have another one? That's what the United Nations was built on. So veto power itself was built for that. However, there are other decisions that don't really require veto power, right? There are other decisions that might be political in quotes, right? Things like let's condemn Russia. condemning Russia wasn't like, let's go bomb Russia. You know, just like, let's condemn your action so it's on record that it's wrong for a country to invade another sovereign country, right? And then you form precedents for the future. So for non-nuclear decisions, the suggestion from this 10-3 vote says that we should abolish veto power. So that just as the principle we noticed earlier, we only recognize who initiated the vote and then make everybody else homogeneous, so that you then have a particular number of votes that each person has to reach to be able to make a resolution pass. The second way to apply this would be to change the minimum number of votes for a resolution. So currently, for both groups, is 9 votes. If you get 9 votes and you don't get a dominant nation say no to your vote, you can pass an issue at the Security Council. However, we're saying, okay, remove that 9 and now have the wild dog system, where the minimum for a powerful country should be 7, and the minimum for a temporary country, which is one of the less dominant countries, should be 12. And I'm sure you asked why 7 and 12, right? Because like, why 10 and 3, why 7 and 12? Now, there are 5 permanent members in the Security Council. And so let's think of a situation where the permanent members gang up against the, the temporary nations, right? They would still need 2 votes from the other bloc to be able to move something forward. So you leave room for diplomacy and negotiation and human interaction and stuff like that. And then you have 10 members from 10 non-permanent members in the Security Council. So, but they need 12. So they still need 2 extra votes from the permanent bloc. So let's say that you have that splitting in both ways. You still need to be able to have that interaction and negotiation, which is the hallmark of diplomacy, right? So you give room for all that human touch in the space without having them splitting the council into 2. And then just like I said earlier, giving space for multiple voting to happen before quorum is reached as well. So that's basically what the idea. That's how I've been able to translate an idea found in nature to the Security Council, the UN Security Council, seeing a particular ecosystem of our decision making and how we can apply something we've seen in nature to that. So taking the idea to the real world. So I did this in 2023, sorry. And so like since then, I sent a proposal to the Security Council's Practices and Charter Research Branch, who had acknowledged this, but has still not gotten back in touch to say like whether they like the idea or they're going to like do anything about it. And then I'd also like presented this at a couple of like think tanks. So there's this thing tank called UN 2.0. They were part of the I think they're called Policy Pioneers or something. There's a group that came out of COVID where you had like various think tanks coming together to rethink the way we're doing like global cooperation and work around the UN and stuff like that. So I presented this to them, which is one of the screenshots that you can see there. Presented it to biomimicry groups and continue to present it as something I think as a way to sort of like push the idea forward and get a lot more people to like ask questions and poke holes into it and stuff like that. I'd also start to like work with smaller associations that have, and because this voting system will work in a group with uneven power, right? With even power, you don't really need a 10-3 voting system, right? Because everyone has the same power. It doesn't really matter who raises stuff. But if you have a group that has uneven power, it becomes easier. So you then begin to like use that dynamic of who is dominant and who is less dominant, just as the wild dogs basically work. So we had tested this twice, but we haven't really. I feel like we're still at the testing stage. We're looking for a lot more organizations to be able to try this with. The challenge we've had is that most associations and groups have even power, even though you have like a former president of an organization. If he leaves office, he's still like, let's say chapter president, he's still, when he's not the chapter president, he still has like 1 vote. He doesn't have like a higher power or something. So that's the issue we've had. I think we're still on the search for those kind of organizations that have uneven power. And if you know of any, please let us know so that we can pilot the idea and see what's like. And I feel like if we can test it over and over again and see that it actually does work in a human setting, then it's cool. And perhaps an advocacy campaign to push this further for the UN Security Council could be like the next step. Yeah. So that's it. I know this is really way faster than the time that we have planned, but I'm just like going to open it now to Craig and to the rest of you guys. If you have questions or thoughts about biomimicry, you're interested in learning more about how to apply these nature principles to public policy and advocacy campaigns that you might have, I'll be happy to take those at this time. Thank you. Thanks.
Ebenezer live all the way from Nigeria, almost at, what is it, almost at midnight now? Thank you so much for speaking all the way from Nigeria as our United Nations speaker today. I do ask her if there are any Clark scholars or MAP scholars or anyone on this call that has questions for Ebenezer, please type in the chat now, or you can also unmute yourself. Wonderful presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Bill wants to know, what are your reasons in being involved in the UN and what are the steps to be involved?
I actually first got involved with the UN through the UN has something called the online volunteering service. Let me see if I can quickly get that. So the UN has an online volunteering service, and as far back as 2012, I had joined the online volunteering service. I'm just sharing the link in here for those of you who might be interested in being online volunteers. Online volunteers basically do like diverse things, like they review, sometimes they help with like translation. I'd worked with the UN's social media team, which was led at the time by Nancy Groves. And so like I'd been involved. So like for like various UN observance days, it'll be like, oh, it's Women's Day, let's post this and this and this, help us like repost this in your own networks and stuff like that. So like it's really basically, at the time, it wasn't really like complicated things, right? So people who would help with like transcription, there'll be like tons and tons of audio from like all the UN meetings and stuff like that. And they wanted like multiple translators to be able to like transcribers rather to transcribe all of these things. So you'd have people like that doing stuff like that. So I'd gotten involved because I just really cared about like what will shape my future and shape my life, and whether or not people agree. Decisions that are made in those spaces affect us, right? They affect our future, affect our lives. I mean, a good example is that just everything for you guys happening in the US with USAID is having ripple effects all around the world, right? With like the US leaving WHO, all those kind of things are just having ripple effects. So like just being involved in diplomacy and understanding what's happening, I think is quite key for our future as young people. And so that's basically what has gotten me quite interested in that. I also used to have a blog called The Stroll, and this was before I started writing HuffPo. And on The Stroll, on each UN Observance Day, I would like select a celebrity or an expert to be able to, okay, I can see another question. I selected a celebrity or an expert to be able to interview, right? And just like send them questions. And that's how I interviewed like Malala Yousafzai, Amina Mohammed. And this was like so many years ago, like far back as 2013, 2014, just to talk about like international observance days and why these days are key and what people can do to observe Women's Day, for example, or Mother Language Day or stuff like that. You know, so there's so many ways you can engage with the United Nations, whether it's through like Model UN or stuff like that. Yeah. So I'll share links to the blog as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from Chinasa. Sorry, not sure if you shared, but what tribe are you from? My father is from Igbo tribe. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Chinasa. Yes, so I'm actually from the Ogoni tribe, which is in the south of Nigeria. Some people know the late Ken Saro-Wiwa a lot more because he's from the Ogoni tribe. Ken Saro-Wiwa was a vocal voice on climate issues and environmental pollution in Nigeria and most of Africa. So I'm from that tribe, but I have a lot of friends who are from the Igbo tribe. You know, my wife's grandmother is Igbo as well, and I was in Imo State a couple of years ago. So yes, so I'm always visiting the Igbo region. Really good to meet you, Chinasa.
Thank you so much. Are there any other scholars that have any questions before we conclude? So especially so Ebenezer can get some rest because it's almost midnight in Nigeria. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I do ask the Valiants that are on this call for Friday for our, okay, Bill says, what challenges have you faced during this and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that you face, first of all, like being in the biomimicry space, is that people, first of all, are like, how can we, like, for example, how can wild dogs advise the UN Security Council, right? It does sound quite absurd, right? So like just just like not being understood some of the time, I think can make you feel like, am I even doing the right thing? I think just being persistent, understanding why you're doing what you're doing, just like the basic things, right? Everyone will call you crazy until they see something great come out of it, etc. I think those are basically the things that have kept me going in this particular space. And so, like, since volunteering for the UN, I've gone on to like work with the World Economic Forum. I've worked with the Open Government Partnership. I've spoken at the World Economic Forum. I've organized TEDx events. I've spoken at TEDx events. So all of those things I think just come because of the fact that first of all, you're willing to give much more than get. And I think once you come with the open heart, willing to give something back, you always get something back in return. So that's been my own personal principle, and I hope it works for you as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Ebenezer. Valiance, please type in the chat, unmute yourself, please, for Friday, March 7th, 2025. Give a round of applause to our United Nations speaker for today, directly, live from Nigeria, Ebenezer!
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and inspiring the next generation. And thank you so much for being a change maker, inspiring the next generation today. Thank you. Have a great